This tutorial is all about practicing observational drawing with simple basic shapes like a seashell. I will be using the contour drawing style where you focus on outer edges and the contours of objects and focusing on one continuous line. If you love learning about art, hit that subscribe button and support this public school art teacher's side hustle. To do the contour drawing style, I will be using a pen and I'm going to use, like I said before, one continuous line. So it's all about drawing from direct observation. So if something doesn't look right, overlap and go back over it again, and then add your smaller details last. So you can see I'm focusing on the basic shape. Now this isn't blind contour drawing. I am staring at the seashell the whole time I'm drawing it. Blind contours are really fun because you practice hand-eye coordination where you don't look at your paper at all. My goal here is to do the contour style so I can force myself to just look at what it actually looks like and not make it up. But I am going to look at my paper so that there is a realism or an accuracy to it. So you can see I drew one shell before and I really didn't like the angle of it. Instead of going straight down, it just looks a little bit more like a croissant to me than a seashell. So I decided to pick a shape that's a little bit more simple, and repetition is key here. You can see that I'm following the lines of the seashell to this central point. That was hard to say, seashell, central point, to get the overall effect of the shell. Then I will think about going back and adding some of those darker brown areas. I'm using a really thin pen. I probably wouldn't use the thinnest one for this, but I only had two sizes, and so I just kind of went with this one, and it is running out of ink a little bit. So now you can see I'm going back in and repeating my line a little bit faster. And now that I have the overall shape and the basic lines, I'm going to add a little bit more detail with those darkest areas, still focusing more on line and shape and not really shading, but just more line weight. I want that area to appear darker because it's darker on the shell. Let's move on to a little bit more of a complicated one. So same technique here, one continuous line, focusing on the outer edges, not worrying about the small details yet. Another important technique within contour drawing, and this is the thing I'm the worst at, is taking your time and drawing slowly. Really map out the object, and this is a more complicated shell than I've done before, and really look at the points, the lines, the shape, and where and how they interact with each other. I'm going probably too fast, as I always do, because when you're drawing slow and really looking, the simplest shapes really can come to life. So not only am I looking at the outer edges and focusing on one continuous line, I'm trying to go slowly, really letting my eye visually map out the pathway that my pen is going to take. I want to add a little bit more line weight in certain areas, and I could either get a pen that has a thicker point to it, or I can overlap my lines a little bit to give that illusion of kind of that darker brown, or maybe where there's a shadow or just a liner shape that appears a little bit more thick. Since I have them, I'm going to draw a few more shells, focusing on a shape I haven't done quite yet, and then for the end, the shape that I struggled with in my first drawing. Practice makes better, so maybe I can get it better the second time. Keep watching, I'm doing the same technique. A fun technique to elevate any simple drawing is to add some light watercolor washes. So I'm using just very basic Prang watercolors, and I'm going to just add a little bit of a shell color to the shells I have here. Since they're very natural, neutral colors, I'm going to be relying a lot on my oranges, browns, and yellows that I'll water down to get that beautiful kind of natural shell color. I will be leaving lots of the areas white, so just letting the white of the paper shine through. And this sketchbook I'm using is not made for water-based media. So this is breaking a rule. You should always use water-based media paper. So paper that's made for painting, watercolor, acrylic, ink. And this paper is not, it's just drawing paper. So I'm going to not be doing tons of overlapping, and you'll see the paper is going to wrinkle. But this is a sketchbook that I have, and this is, not going to be hung up on my refrigerator or anything. It's a sketchbook page where I'm just practicing my observational skills. And I just really love how watercolor can pop and make the objects really stand out. I'm adding a little bit of blue, and so if you mix your complementary colors, that neutralizes and browns out a color. So I do like to add a little bit of blue as well, and some of the shells have like almost a violet brown going on, which is fun. And of course you can use a paper towel to blot. This shell is really fun because it has so many sections to it, so I'm going to kind of paint both at the same time, still seeing croissants when I look at that first one, and then a little bit more of a warm kind of orange brown for that. Blot, blot. And now what I really want to do is give it a shadow to look like it's anchored down to something. So they're not just seashells floating around, but there's a shadow. With watercolor, my favorite two colors to blend to make a shadow is brown and blue. And you can see it makes this really gorgeous kind of gray neutral shadow. And again, this is observational. So I'm looking at the shells as they sit on my sketchbook and saying, what does the shadow look like for each shell? Now, I'm not like doing a scientific painting where it needs to be exactly how it looks in real life, but I am going to try and capture it to a certain degree. But I was more focused on the details while drawing, and this is just a fun way to elevate the page. Certainly I could have stopped with just the drawing, but again, I love line work over or under watercolor. I just think just the simplest washes of color can really just make a drawing come to life. This is so fun. I feel like I can pick up some of these shells off the page, and I am going to layer a second so the shadow color with a little bit less water, and I'm going to layer it a second time to give it more of a deeper shadow where the shell would touch the page, the surface, and kind of rolls around to what it's sitting on. This will make it look a little bit more 3D. Okay, all done. Thank you so much for sticking around and making art with me. And if you're interested in more observational drawing tutorials, check these out. Find me on Instagram at thatartteacher_Machado to see what my students are up to in my classroom. And my website, thatartteacher.com, has all of my free lesson plans, rubrics, and student examples.